So, I've had several of my friends ask me, how did I find the right coach for me? As I pondered this question, I recalled my almost 7-month journey. I realized that finding a coach was almost as important as choosing a spouse or finding the right therapist, and I didn't want to regret this decision. I don't know if you're like me, but I used to be the type of person that would make a decision and then either change my mind if I could get out of it or regret it if I couldn't reverse it. And it usually was based upon the amount of money that I spent. So I spent the first 2 months of consideration, actually getting past the scarcity mindset that I had around spending anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for coaching. And then I spent another month convincing myself that I needed a coach and that it was okay to spend the money on me and my education. Once I overcame those hurdles, the hunt began. At the same time, I was fortunate enough to have some amazing coaching guests on my podcast. And the more I interviewed them, the more I realized that personal coaches are not a one size fits all category. You have mindset coaches, real estate coaches, performance coaches, relationship coaches, money coaches, business coaches, and so you get the idea. Once I realized that there were different types of coaches, I knew I had to find a way to narrow them down. So I did two things. I studied the coaches that I was interested in, and I asked myself what I was looking for and what I needed. So when I considered coaches, I asked myself what kinds of outcomes did they produce? Did they teach mindset shifting? Was it outcome based? Was it for accountability? Did they have a specialty or could I relate to their experiences in a certain way? I asked these questions alongside what I personally needed in a coach. Asking myself what I didn't need was also a good way to narrow down the choices too. But one thing that I was glad I did not do was just rush into hiring somebody. For me personally, I didn't need an accountability coach. I already had a good system in place for accountability. I also realized I didn't need a coach to learn a certain skill because honestly, I really didn't know what skill I wanted to learn. So I was looking for someone whose style, tone of voice, personality, and background resonated with me. Lots of questions, I know, but the more questions I asked myself, the closer I got to my coach. So for me, I realized that I needed to go deeper in my journey of personal development. So I went looking for someone who would address the inside out first. I knew what coach I was looking for. So I'm sure you're wondering how I found my coach. Well, it's an interesting story because I knew what I was looking for. And so when the right coach appeared, I knew it. So here's what happened. I was listening to a podcast with a certain guest. I then searched for that guest on other podcasts and I found one. I listened to that podcast. And as a result, I reached out to the host of that podcast and invited him on my podcast. He agreed, and I scheduled a phone call to get his background story and find out what we were going to talk about. I did a little research on him before we spoke, and I found out that he was a coach as well. Well, it turned into an hour-long conversation that resulted in me hiring him as my coach. I realized that my months of searching and knowing what I wanted prepared me for the moment when I knew I'd found the right person. And as for spending the money and regret, well, I didn't have any regret because I knew I made the right decision. As I continue to work with my coach, my transformation has been amazing. I know now what we have to focus on, and he knew what my goals were for our sessions. So now I can hear you say, but Sue, I don't have a podcast and I can't find a coach the way you did. I understand. This is true. And that's why I've partnered with some of the most amazing coaches that I've had the opportunity to know in my journey. If I'm not a good fit for you, then someone out there is. So, what's your next small step that can lead to a big win for you? What type of coach do you need? Check out my resources, listen to some podcasts or YouTube, and use the resources out there to help you make the best choice. Take that first step today that will change your tomorrow. And remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Oh, and also hiring the perfect coach.